Well, again, a great and warm word of welcome to you all. Thanks very much for taking the time to be here. I trust that everyone got here safely and well. And so I'm grateful, first of all, for you taking the first step, and a very bold step, that's simply just being present. It's not a small thing to simply come here and get information about the diaconate program. I don't know what brought you here. I don't know what means got you here. But know this, that somehow, for some reason, God wanted you here. The people, the circumstances, the emails, the flyers, whatever it might be, those are secondary and tertiary at best. It's God's will that for some reason you're here right now. No matter what the next hour or two or week or month or year ahead might hold for you, know that for some reason you are here now. So know that this is actually part of God's will for you. So take a deep breath and realize that, again, for whatever reason, God wants you to hear this information, to share this moment tonight. So thanks very much again for your willingness to be here. Our aim tonight is rather simple, though multifaceted, is to give you an overview of the discernment process, the application process, and the formation process for the diaconate program here in the Diocese of Rockville Center. So as I go through the presentation, you may have some questions, but I kindly ask you to hold those questions until the end, when we'll have time to field questions for all of us. And then at the very end, once we conclude the program, my information team who are present will be able to take your individual questions, maybe about your circumstances or individual questions that you or your wife may have. Okay? So again, a warm word of welcome here to the Seminary of the Immaculate Conception, at the heart of which is the formation for permanent deacons in our diocese. So the first thing is just to let you know a little bit about who we are, who makes up the formation team, who's really, got a strong voice in this process. First and foremost, it goes without saying, but it should be said, is Bishop Murphy. As the Bishop of the Diocese, is the chief formator. And Bishop Murphy is a very active bishop, and I mean that literally. He's very, very active when it comes to the formation program. He takes great pride in the men who are in formation. He takes great joy in their wives, and he also takes great care to be in constant contact with me and the formation team. Whenever I'm with him, which is pretty frequent, he'll always ask, how are the men doing? And each year we have a formal conversation, he and I, in which I update him formally on the progress of each of the men in formation. He takes great care in his appointment to those of us who are charged to be in formation. So again, he's very, very active. And as the bishop, he has the final word in all matters pertaining to the sacrament of holy orders. So it's his word that finalizes one's acceptance into the program. His is the word that advances a man each year towards the next step in formation, and he is ultimately the one who calls men to sacred orders, to holy orders, both for the diaconate and for the priesthood. So Bishop Murphy is, as I say there, the chief formator for our diocese. He's asked me, Father Greg Ranazizi, to serve as the director, and I've had the joy of being in this position now for a couple of years, and it's an extraordinary work. I get to work with a fine team of deacons, 33 very fine men who are in formation right now. I've seen one class ordained already, so great joy in this work. My task is to oversee and implement the formation program, both from the national directory that we receive from the U.S. Conference of Bishops, also, of course, keeping an eye on any documents or any instructions that come from the Holy See, from the Vatican itself, as well as taking into account Bishop Murphy's desires for his formation program here. I have the joy of working with 5 extraordinary deacons who serve as formators. These deacons are Deacon Art Candido, Deacon Tom Fox, Deacon Larry Falkenberry, Deacon John Greevy, and Deacon Tom Lucy. This is a rather new innovation to our program. Only for the past couple of years we've had a team of 5 deacons dedicated to the work of formation. I mention that because it's a testament to the importance of the program and the bishop's desire that it be as good as possible, to be the best it can possibly be. And so we know that personnel is a tremendous resource, especially when we're speaking about clergy. There aren't many priests and many deacons, and so to have 5 deacons committed as their assignment to this work speaks volumes about the importance that Bishop Murphy places on diaconate formation. So these 5 deacons serve with me as formators, and I'll explain a little bit more about what they do later on. So that's a little bit about us. There's also a number of people who assist in various ways the program. So first I should mention Monsignor Richard Henning. Monsignor Henning is the rector of the seminary, so he oversees the entire operations here at the seminary. I also serve as his vice rector, so I help in the administration of this building and all its programs, but Monsignor Henning in a particular way is charged by Bishop Murphy to really be his eyes and his ears in the world of formation, both of the diaconate as well as for the men who are studying for the priesthood. And Monsignor Henning is a scholar in his own right, being a scripture scholar. He served on the faculty of seminaries for about 12 years and is a professor of sacred scripture, so has extensive experience in the formation world. And again, because he oversees everything that happens here, the diaconate program has a very dear place in his heart, and he's been a tremendous resource to me in my work. Deacon Larry Falconberry, who should sound familiar because you just saw him on the other slide as well. Deacon Larry has recently been appointed as the Director of Deacon Personnel. So we joke about there are 2 sides to our office. I'm in charge of the men who are in formation for the diaconate. Once ordained, they then come under the purview of Deacon Larry in conjunction with whatever assignment they have for parish or other work. So he's kind of the overseer on a personnel side to ensure that all the needs are being met. He operates at Bishop Murphy's instruction to ensure that our deacons are where they need to be, and he also works with them for their ongoing formation as well. We are assisted by Ms. Carol Rosati, who I'm sure some of you have spoken to or emailed with. Carol is kind of the hub of the wheel. She's the administrative assistant for us and for the office to ensure that everything runs as smoothly as possible. And also we have Brian Williams, who serves as the Associate Dean for St. Joseph's Seminary. And I'll explain St. Joseph's relationship to us when we get to the academic piece of our session today. So he oversees, that is Ryan Williams, oversees all the programs, the academic programs that happen here at the Huntington campus. We come under the umbrella of St. Joseph's Seminary on an academic level, and so we have campuses, the main campus in Yonkers, the minor seminary in Douglaston, Queens, and of course here in Huntington. So Ryan oversees our program here as the dean. So that's a little bit about us. We'd like to go a little bit about you right now. So what I'd like to do now is share with you a little video that was made by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, specifically the Committee on Clergy, Consecrated Life, and Vocations. This is a little video that really summarizes very well the diaconate, and it's done by a neighboring bishop, Bishop Octavio Cisneros, who's an auxiliary bishop next door in Brooklyn.
The ministry of Jesus among us has always been of being present to us, being of service to us. He said, "I have come not to be served, but to serve." A deacon is a man who could be married or not, who receives a call by Christ and the church as an ordained minister to act as Christ in the ministry of service. And he is called a permanent deacon. On Holy Thursday, Holy Father Francis visited a jail for young offenders in Rome. He went to celebrate the ritual of washing of the feet, recalling Jesus' washing of the apostles' feet, where he instructed them that they were to be of service to one another. That ministry of service, to care for one another, is not just for a few, but for all of us who have been baptized and call ourselves Christians. However, in a special way, the apostles, since the earliest time, chose men to share with them as ordained ministers. They were called deacons, from a Greek word meaning service. They assisted priests and bishops in serving the needs of the community. By the imposition of the hands by the bishop, they are ordained and receive the grace of holy orders to imitate Christ in helping others. Deacons assist the bishop and priest at Mass, in the distribution of Holy Communion, in blessing marriages, in the proclamation of the Gospel, and in preaching, in presiding over funerals, and in the many needs that the ministry of charity demands. Feeding the poor, instructing others, visiting the sick. In other words, the ministry of the deacon is to be present to serve others and to allow others to see in their ministry the face of Christ, the servant of us all. Pope Francis said when he went to the jail to wash the feet of the young offenders in jail, help one another. This is what Jesus teaches us. This is what I do, and I do it with my heart. If you feel it in your heart that God is calling you to ministry in the permanent diaconate, say yes. In helping each other, we will do good for each other.
So Bishop Cisneros there gives us a very good overview of what deacons do, what deacons are, and the history of the diaconate. But I want to just unpack that a little bit more and also explain how it is we in this diocese form men for the diaconate. So first is just a brief, very, very brief history of the diaconate. We know well that it is very clearly in Scripture. And so we read in the Acts of the Apostles in chapter 6 how, and I'm paraphrasing here, how the apostles were in charge of the community of believers, which was small but growing. And it was the custom at the time that those who were Christians, because they were such a minority and really outcast, that they would pool all their resources together, whatever they had, money, possessions, etc. And they would pool it together to take care of each other. And there came a point where there was a little bit of a fight between a disagreement between some of the widows, the Greek-speaking widows and the Jewish widows, about the distribution of some of the goods. And so the apostles very rightly said, this is important, but this is not what we should be chiefly about. We are about proclaiming the word and ministering over and guiding the whole community. So they said, choose from among yourselves 7 reputable men. And they do. And the apostles lay hands on those 7 men, and they become, as we would call them now, the first deacons. Again, that Greek word diakonia, which means service. I like to think of those first deacons not only as, well, just that, but kind of like the church's first social workers, outreach directors, business managers, custodians, janitors. They became the right hand of the bishop. So the bishop could reserve his work, his energies, towards teaching and proclaiming and administering the sacraments. Now, the deacons were able to assist with the temporal affairs, the very practical day in and day out work of the early church. And that's how the diaconate develops over several centuries. And it's important to remember that deacons are ordained to the service of the bishop since the earliest days. Deacons serve a diocese, a local church, at the pleasure of the bishop. It's the bishop's very important responsibility to ensure that the needs of his people are met, and he has priests and deacons as his collaborators, his co-workers, to achieve that goal. And so the bishop will assign priests and deacons as he deems necessary to meet the needs of those in his flock. Deacons were a separate order and very active for about the first half of the church's history. And then for a whole blend of reasons we don't have time to go into now, they basically fell out of being a permanent order within the church. They were kind of subsumed under priestly formation. And so all priests are ordained deacons first, but the diaconate became what we call transitional, meaning it was a stepping stone towards the priesthood. It was in the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s that the bishops, the council fathers, invited the church to consider renewing and reestablishing the permanent diaconate. That is, for men of maturity, men of stability, men who are well formed, to take on the role of being deacons permanently. That is, without the assumption that they would become priests. And they left it to each of the national conferences. So for us, the United States Conference of Bishops. Each national conference of bishops to determine how, when, and in what form the diaconate would take place in their dioceses. And so we, in this diocese, since 1979, have had ordained permanent deacons, and they do a wide variety of ministries, as we'll see, and as you have sure experienced. So, first let's think about what is a deacon. Before we get to what they do, what is a deacon? Well, first of all, deacons are men who are called by God. They receive a vocation, and that's really important. It sounds rather obvious, but it's important to take stock of that at first. The vocation for the diaconate is just that, a vocation. It comes from the Latin word vocare, which means to call. So it's really not our idea, I think I want to be a deacon. The way we might say, oh, I think I'll join the choir, or I think I'll do this or that. Wonderful. But a vocation means that God calls us to something. Now, there are what I'll call, my own term, minor vocations, like I think I'll join the choir this year, or I think I'll join that club or this. That's wonderful. But then there are big vocations, capital V vocations, which really impact who we are and really our life's trajectory in many ways. That is a very specific calling by God. And the diaconate is one of those, as is priesthood, marriage, and certainly many careers also have an element of being called into that by God. So deacons are men of prayer, they're men of service and charity, as we heard Bishop Cisneros explain. They're also men of obedience, that is, they collaborate, they work within a structure in a diocese under the direction of a bishop. And they're men who are striving for an intimate, personal relationship with Christ. And then, like we read in the Gospels, that pearl of great price, you want to go and give everything you have. And you also want to share that good news with others. So they are men who have been touched by God's grace, experienced His love, His mercy, who have learned and developed their relationship with Christ, and now want to go out and bring others to that same knowledge, to that same experience. Deacons also make up a fraternal order of deacons, and we have a very, very strong one here in Rockville Center. In fact, just recently had their biannual convocation, and hundreds of deacons gathered together in prayer to receive some ongoing formation and addressed by the bishop and all. There's a great spirit of camaraderie and fraternity when our deacons gather. So that's what a deacon is. Let's consider that there are now about 300 deacons, just a little under 300 deacons, serving in 115 of our 133 parishes. In fact, probably most of our experience of deacons is seeing them active in our parish. But deacons are also involved in many other ministries throughout the diocese. They serve in diocesan offices to help coordinate the work of the bishop and his staff. They work in hospitals and hospice ministry. They work in prison ministry on college campuses. And deacons, of course, now are involved in the formation of future deacons. So deacons do a wide variety of work. And while our experience of them might be very parochial, deacons are by their nature ordained for the service of a much broader community that is a whole diocese. So what do deacons do? Okay? Well, they're called to proclaim the gospel both in word and in action. The word part is rather obvious. I think we're used to seeing that whenever there's a deacon at Mass and he's assisting a priest or a bishop or even a pope, it's the deacon who rightly proclaims the gospel. Because that was one of their early charges, to go and proclaim the gospel. And so it's both symbolic but also a liturgical gesture that a deacon always proclaims the gospel at Mass. But more than that, a deacon is called to live the gospel. Deacons are, by virtue of ordination, publicly ordained ministers. They are public witnesses of the church in a way that all the baptized aren't necessarily. We're all called to be witnesses to Christ, sure, but those who are ordained to the clergy have freely chosen to become public witnesses of the church, to be leaders within the community. And so their example speaks as, if not more loudly, than what they proclaim. They serve the needs of the poor and the vulnerable, especially those on the periphery of society, the ones who might be forgotten, the ones who could be lost in a great crowd. Deacons are called to have eyes for the periphery. They also help in liturgical settings in our public prayer, and so we see them again very regularly at Mass. They also assist priests and the bishop in presiding over wakes and burials, over weddings, over baptisms, and in other public prayer settings. They offer leadership in parishes to a variety of ministries. They also exercise ministry under the direction of the bishop in collaboration with other deacons and with the priests to whom they are assigned. Again, most especially in parishes, but also in other work as well. It's also important to consider what deacons aren't. Because sometimes there's a little bit of a confusion as to what deacons do and what they are and how that separates them from other people. Remember, the diaconate is a specific calling by God. It is one of the ranks of the hierarchy of the church, we say. And so it has a very specific character and nature and calling. So first of all, deacons are not junior priests. I sometimes hear it that, the father can't make it, but we'll get a deacon instead. Now, I know what that means. It's a very practical thing. There are certain things that deacons do that I do all the time, like wakes and weddings and baptisms, or exposing the Blessed Sacrament for periods of adoration and doing benediction, or visiting a CCP class and giving a presentation on confirmation or First Communion. I do all of those things with parish priests regularly. And there are times where I can't be there, and so yes, we do call a deacon, but we should never consider deacons as junior priests. They're like baby priests. They're priests who just can't, hear confession, say mass, or anoint the sick. But other than that, they can do everything. No, they're not junior priests. They are a separate, distinct order with a separate, distinct vocation. Some of that ministry does overlap with what priests do. So too does some of the ministry of deacons overlap with what laity do. But there's a specific element because they are officially charged, ordained ministers that sets them apart from both priests and from the laity. Because they are called by God and affirmed by the church to specific ministries and roles within the community. Deacons are not the chief volunteer, okay? Sometimes men will come to me and say, well, I've been to the EM, I've been elected, I've done the parish council, I've done this committee, that committee, I'm a Knight of Columbus, I've done all that, so it seems like the nice thing to do. Not exactly. All of those things are important and good, and I've already heard some of you explain about the ministries you're involved in. That's wonderful, good, keep going. But that doesn't necessarily mean you are called to the diaconate. The diaconate, again, is a separate, distinct call. And just because we've checked a lot of boxes in parish life, doesn't necessarily mean we are called to be deacons. It's a wonderful thing for a pastor to have someone as a right-hand man. But that doesn't mean we're necessarily called to the diaconate. It doesn't mean that we're the super lector, the super EM, the super usher, the super catechist, the super ministry person. Again, we might be involved in those sorts of things, but as deacons, we are collaborators with the bishops and priests who oversee these ministries in a very distinct way. So we don't just participate in them and do them, we actually are the ones who ordinarily do them. So let's flip it for a moment. It's really the laity who participate in varied ways and in limited ways with the work of deacons. And so proclaiming the word rightly belongs to a deacon. For a whole bunch of practical reasons, we have others who assist in that. It's deacons and priests who ordinarily go and bring communion to those who are sick, visit the imprisoned. But of course, the laity at times will also do that. But for us who are ordained, this is our work. This is our purpose. This is who we are called to be. So it's not just a volunteering, which is wonderful. It's a much fuller, deeper call and commitment. Also, deacons are not a temporary solution to the reality that we have fewer priests now than we did a generation or two ago. Now, we know that's the reality. There are fewer priests, but deacons are not the solution. Why? Because deacons simply cannot do what priests do. So the solution for the problem of having fewer priests is more priests. It's not more deacons. We need deacons, and we need priests. So some thought, perhaps mistakenly, that the church's reinstitution of the permanent diaconate would somehow fill a gap. Yes, we priests are greatly helped by the ministry of deacons. But at the end of the day, there are bishops, there are priests, and there are deacons. And it takes all three ranks working together, built up by the laity in their prayers and their collaboration to achieve the work of the church. They are separate and distinct and necessary. So what are the goals of our formation program here in the diocese? Well, they're twofold. The first is, get all this, to prepare men aspiring to the order of deacons, academically, emotionally, pastorally, spiritually, humanly, and liturgically, in their ministry in parishes, hospitals, campuses, prisons, and elsewhere. That's it. That's our goal. Now, you see there's a lot of pieces to that, because there are two sides. There's the formation side and the setting side. And so, we use that term, by the way, notice formation, not training. Training is about skill sets. I used to be a trainer in first aid and CPR for the Red Cross. I was an EMT for a little while, and I would do these training sessions. And I did just that. I trained people a skill set, how to do this. If this, then do that. If not this, don't do that. Very simple. And over the course of a few hours, People who came in not knowing how to do something now knew how to do it. That's training, and that's good. But we're in the business of forming. Forming isn't only up here with knowledge. It's more importantly about here in the heart. We'll engage both a lot, trust me. But it's about forming minds and hearts to put on the mind and the heart of Christ. And so we look at all those different facets: academics, emotion, pastoral, spiritual, being good people. And we'll unpack this shortly. So that we can then serve in a wide variety of ministries. Again, most fundamentally in the parish, but yes, also in other settings as well. My second goal, our second goal as a team, is to help the wives of those men who want information to live out your call as baptized women, members of the body of Christ. And so I have an obligation to the sacrament of matrimony, for those of you who are living that sacrament already, to ensure that that sacrament of matrimony is in no way hindered by the introduction of a new sacrament, that is, of holy orders. And I have to make sure that the holy orders is not, in any way challenged by marriage. I have to make sure that both of them are growing and maturing in a healthy way. And so I have that very important obligation along with the team to ensure that both sacraments are, as it were, progressing well and being formed within us all. There used to be an earlier approach to the diaconate which was a little bit fractured. And again, the diaconate is still a relatively new reality in the church, especially here in America. And so what happened is that the priorities became, well, your first was your family, of course. Your second was your job, your profession. And then whatever time was left over, you were then a deacon. And really what that did was it set up this mentality like, all right, now I have my husband hat on. Now I have my lawyer hat on. Now I have my deacon hat on. And that, what it does is starts to fracture us, and it then starts to bleed over to that super volunteer kind of mentality. Like, oh, I'm a volunteer who kind of dresses up at Mass, and I do particular things at Mass. And then I'm take up my deacon stuff, and I go back to being a husband, a father, and a banker. Well, that's not exactly what being a deacon is all about. There's a much more developed, much more nuanced way of approaching the diaconate, and it goes something like this. You're a deacon at family. You're a deacon at work. You're a deacon 24/7. You're always a deacon. Once you are ordained, you are always a deacon. Meaning, you bring your diaconal mentality and heart and service to your family, to the marketplace, and also, of course, to the parish and to your ministry. But you are a deacon all the time. Again, it's not just training, I know how to put out a fire. I go, I put out the fire, I come home, I'm done. Not deacons. I'm a deacon out there, I'm a deacon at home, I'm a deacon when I'm alone, I'm a deacon when I'm with people, I'm always a deacon. And so that's what we're really aiming for, is a fully formed man. Some basic requirements, and I'm sure some of you have asked already about this, but these are just the very basic requirements that we have for those who are pursuing the diaconate. The first is the age frame is between 35 and 60 years old at the time of application. So right about now, between 35 and 60. The reason for that is the church, in her wisdom, realizes that a man should have some stability and maturity about him before he enters into a program of formation. And also, too, the cap of 60 is simply because it takes roughly 4 to 5 years to be formed as a deacon, and deacons retire at about 72 or 75, and so there's a lot of investment of time and other resources, and so we want to have, to put it bluntly, a bit of a return on that investment. Deacons may be married, widowed, or single. This is also another important point to bring to your attention if you weren't already aware of it. Those who are already married, make a promise that should they return to the single state, which sadly usually means that your wife would predecease you, you promise that you will remain in a celibate state for the remainder of your life. That same promise is made by those men who are already single. They make the promise of lifelong celibacy. The reason for that is because when a deacon promises life to the good of the church for a married man recognizes, well, he also has a wife and family to take care of. But should those circumstances change, he no longer has those same responsibilities. If his wife should have died, if his children are grown and matured on their own, his whole heart, as it were, is now placed at the service of the church in a way obviously, for practicality's sake, isn't prior to with his wife. So he gives his entire life now to the service of the church. That's an important conversation that those of you who are married would want to have with your spouse. We also ask that those who are married for at least 6 years in a valid Catholic marriage. Okay? That you are generally secure in life, both financially, that you have good health, that you have good physical and mental health, that you have, as far as academics, at least a high school diploma. We don't require college, so that certainly does help in some of the academic pieces, but it's not a deal breaker and it's not insurmountable either. But we do require, at minimum, a high school diploma. And then you have proficiency in both speaking and in writing English, as our entire program, especially our academic courses, function in that language exclusively. And finally, that you have completed Virtus training, which I imagine most, if not all of you, already have because you are involved in your parishes. But if for some reason you have not been Virtus trained yet, you want to do that very, very soon. So that's a little bit about the men. You ladies, what do we ask for you who are the spouses of those in formation as well as for those who are deacons? Well, remember this, that the vocation to the diaconate is that of your husbands, not yours. And that's not a matter of being better or worse, less or more. It's simply a matter of understanding what we, the formation team, would expect of the men in formation versus that which we would expect of the wives. It's good for us to be very clear about what the expectations are. I and the team reasonably and rightly place certain tasks, certain guideposts for the men in formation that we don't necessarily transfer over to wives. And so that should give us a little bit of freedom and breathing room to understand that there are certain things that are expected of the men and certain things that are expected of their wives. The wives of the men in formation and those who are ordained are necessarily affected by the sacrament of holy orders. Because you share that sacred bond, that sacramental bond of marriage, you also then share, in a way, in that diaconal vocation. Not that it is yours, but the reality, the practicalities that accompany being the wife of a clergyman will impact you. It's not just him who will become a public witness of the church. You also become a rather public person, whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not. People will look to you, and there's an important and delicate balance as to know when we should, that is, wives, speak, and when we should also allow, a referral to our husband as the pastor, for example. And so it's learning that delicate balance about how to be the wife of a clergyman. And that's why we invite the wives into the formation process in a number of ways to ensure that they are happy and comfortable with this. Most importantly, we ask for the wives' patience. Because as you will see in a few moments, there's a lot that goes into the formation program. A lot. There's also a lot that goes into being a deacon. A lot. And so you wives share in that responsibility, and so we ask for your patience because there will be times where your husband might be asked to do something that will impact your family, your schedule, or your plans. So we simply ask for your patience and cooperation. And it's also important to remember that that wives must give consent, must, by law, give consent to their husband's application for the diaconate, their formation process, and their ordination. I, nor the bishop, can call a man to orders without the consent of his wife, in all three steps. For the application, throughout the period of formation, and of course finally and ultimately at the time of the call to ordination. So you wives are fundamentally a part of this process. So how do we organize formation? We do so around what we call the 4 dimensions of formation. And this is true both of priestly formation and diaconal formation, but naturally we'll just focus on diaconal formation for our purposes today. The first dimension is what we call human formation. What does that mean? Well, basically, it means that we want you to be good men. As I put it, simply attractive men. Not just necessarily exteriorly, though that's important, that we're put together, that we have a neat and tidy appearance and all, because we are public witnesses and public officials of the church, but also, too, that we have an attractive personality, that we have good interpersonal skills, good conversational skills, that people would feel comfortable coming to us and talking to us. Because the reality is, Some people will feel more comfortable going to a deacon to talk about something than they might their priest. And it takes good experience and a little bit of art and science to know, as a deacon, when your resources might be tapped and you need to kind of now usher him on to Father. But you might be the conduit that he comes to first, and so you need to have just simply good human skills. The capacity to relate to others in meaningful ways. That you have effective maturity, that you're healthy, both psychologically, psychosexually. You're just simply good men. I call this putting on a WWJD consciousness. That you just simply live your life already through that lens of what would Jesus do in a circumstance. That you're living a life of virtue already. And so we'll look for that in a particular way during the application process, that you are simply a healthy, integrated man. There's also spiritual formation. Now, I have no doubt that everyone here is a person of prayer. I doubt that you would be here if you did not already have a prayer life, a spirituality. So what our goal is to deepen that spirituality. And the reason why we do that is, well, for several purposes. First is, you cannot give what you do not have. And so, if we're going to be ministers of God's Word, if we're going to draw people into the life of grace, we need to be people who are experiencing that ourselves. You cannot give what you do not have. You'll also be public ministers of liturgy, of worship, and so that has to be integrated into who we are. We have to have a rich and deep understanding and appreciation for the sacramental life of the church, as well as for a healthy integration of devotions, be it to the Blessed Mother, to the saints, and all the different devotions that the church has in her rich patrimony. That we understand them, that we're able to explain them, and that we do so in a very balanced way that keeps in mind our tradition. Also, too, we need to become, as I call it, general practitioners of the spiritual life. Why? Not only for our own self-enrichment, but as people come to us and talk to us, we might gravitate towards one spirituality, Ignatian, Franciscan, Salesian, whatever. And if you don't know what those different schools are, don't worry, we'll teach you. But someone might come to you, and as you listen to them and they tell their story and they explain what moves them and what they're longing for, you'll be able to point them and say, have you ever read Teresa of Avila? Have you ever read St. Benedict? Have you ever read St. Francis? We'll be able to share with them the rich patrimony of the Church's spiritual tradition. The third dimension is academic formation. And this is the one that probably garners the most attention, anxiety, and questions. So we'll unpack this a bit more. But the academic formation, it means that we are looking for those information to be able to understand the essentials of Christian doctrine in the Catholic tradition. That we have a deep knowledge of sacred scripture. After all, a large part of what deacons do is proclaim and preach the word. Not only reading the gospel, but also preaching. Be it at Mass, at wakes and weddings and baptisms, in teaching CCD, RCIA. And again, other people do these sorts of things, but as deacons, we are official teachers of the faith. And so we have to know what the church teaches, why she teaches it, and how she arrived at that teaching. And be able to articulate that in an approachable way. So we have to be competent to explain the doctrines of the church, because all of that goes towards evangelization. We have to know what the church teaches so we can convey it to people, especially those who might not have been in a church a long time, who have no concept of faith. I think immediately of couples who come for marriage preparation. Many times we know it's been a while since they've been to a church or had a conversation with a priest or deacon. We can be very effective ministers of explaining the church. And yes, even at times defending the church. And so it's important we know what the church teaches. And then finally we have pastoral formation. Pastoral formation kind of wraps them all up. Takes what we have learned in the spiritual life, what we have learned in the classroom, and kind of packages it so that we are able to be effective conduits of God's grace to others. And so ordination builds on our baptismal call to be people of service. And so there's a spirit of pastoral responsibility in various settings. We are called to be collaborators, again, with brother deacons, with lay ministers, with priests and our pastor, with the bishop. And we also have to have a respect for the law of the church, we call it canon law. We recognize that we operate in a framework, that we're not freelancers, we're not on our own, that we operate in a community that has a pretty good structure to it. And so, naturally, we always look towards our bishop for guidance and instruction, as well as those that he places in legitimate authority over us in our ministry. So that's a little bit of theory. Now we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts. So how do we actually achieve those rather lofty goals, okay? Well, the formation program is a 4-year program, and it basically follows the academic calendar. So we generally begin the Saturday after Labor Day, and we run to about early May. We have a sizable break for Christmas between that 4th Sunday of Advent through about the first week in ordinary time back, so mid-January or so. And it's a 4-year program, and the first year is called aspirancy. The second year is called candidacy 1. Third year is candidacy 2. And fourth year is candidacy 3. So notice that the numbers don't quite match up. So when you're in second year, you're a candidate 1. When you're in fourth year, you're a candidate 3. So they don't quite match up, so we kind of get confused at times, but don't really get used to them. So we also have an academic program that yields for those who qualify for a Master of Arts in Theology. Now, we'll talk more about the academic program in a little bit. Even if you're not eligible for the Masters in Theology, you still take those courses. Okay? And again, if you're eligible, you may receive that degree. The formation program includes, besides Saturday classes, all day Saturday, it also includes weekends for retreat. And the men and the wives will each go on 2 retreats a year. One retreat is as a couple, and then there's a retreat just for the wives, and a retreat just for the men. And we'll talk more about the calendar and scheduling when those happen. There are also 3 afternoons of formation a year. Usually one in October, one in November, and then one in February. Those afternoons of formation happen on Sunday afternoons, right here at the seminary. And they really are focused on what I call post-Cana. So that is ongoing marriage formation, ensuring that those graces are still operative in our marriage. And so we want to make sure that, again, those 2 sacraments are evolving well. And so that's really what those afternoons of formation are geared towards. And then, something to keep on the horizon, that for those who are to be ordained that year, at some point prior to ordination, they take a 5-day retreat by law. And so again, that's something we don't have to worry about for years, but prior to ordination at some point, they schedule personally a 5-day retreat. So let's just look at year by year, both the courses that we would take, so that you'll see the academic courses, and on the right side you'll see what we call formation conferences. In addition to the academic courses, in the late afternoons, before we have evening prayer, we will typically, though not always, have a formation conference. And these conferences are geared towards the specific year of formation. And so they're directed by the formation team to, as it were, complement the things we're learning in the classroom to make sure that the spiritual and the pastoral and the human formation is occurring well. So the first year is called aspirancy. So courses that we have include an introduction to the diaconate and theological method, kind of an introduction to everything. Okay? So just kind of get reacclimated to a classroom setting and all. We also have introduction to theology, introduction to the Old Testament, and a course on the Trinity. Because it's aspirancy, it's a lot about getting acclimated into the program, getting used to the formation and understanding what's being expected of us, learning the basic skills of prayer and spirituality and spiritual direction. We'll assign you a spiritual director, if you don't already have one, a trusted priest in our diocese who can accompany you on that journey of your own spiritual formation so that you can one day accompany others. There's also a lot about human formation there. Again, ensuring that you are simply good men. And so, while a lot of the, you might say, the die is cast in a large part already, the team and I will also challenge the points, If we're always late, we're going to say something about that, If assignments are a little tardy, we're going to say something about that. We're going to challenge that human dimension in a particular way. And also, we take time to really explain the promises that a deacon makes at his ordination. And we do so at the very beginning of the program because it's important for us to know what we are getting into. When I'm working with couples who are getting married, I say this to them. I said, So guys, you know, at some point you woke up and you decided, today's the day I'm going to pop the question and I ask you to marry me, right? That wasn't the same day that you should break up with the other girl, right? No. That should have happened a long, long time ago, right? We laugh about that. It's absurd to think that, you know, we're not already living in a way like we're married. There's already not this exclusiveness for the other. We have to be living the life well before we solemnly promise that we're going to do so for the rest of our lives. And so at the outset, we talked about what are the promises of the deacons. So that way, over the next 3 years, we really integrate that into who we are. That we really start living those promises. So on the day of our ordination, we can say with great confidence, yes, I do promise. The second year, again, is called Candidacy 1. It's marked by the men who are advanced to this year to be called by the bishop to be actual official candidates for holy orders. So aspirancy has a lot to do with discernment still. It's really active discernment. But then comes a point where you say, okay, I think I'm being called to this. And we as the formation faculty also assent to that and say yes. And so then you call the candidacy. The courses you would take then are Introduction to the New Testament, Christology, the study of who Jesus is, Introduction to Moral Theology, how ought we live, and Ecclesiology, the study of what it means to be the church. So the conferences that complement these are about understanding the spirituality of stewardship, that we realize that everything we have and that we are is a gift, and we are called to share that gift with others. And also we start to prepare for the next step of formation, which is marked by becoming a reader or a lector. Now again, many of you are already lectors in your parish, but as a deacon, we proclaim the word in a very particular way. And so we, as it were, I don't want to say retrain, but we have a fuller appreciation and understanding of what it means to be a minister of the word, so that we can help others one day to do likewise. And we also get to know the church on a wider level. Most of us, our experience of church is rather broken. We're used to our parish, our pastor, the structures there, and that makes sense. When we start to expand that and stretch that out and help us to realize how the church operates on a diocesan level, on a national level, and on an international, universal, global level. So we can, again, be members of that hierarchy of the church and really understand how she functions. We also then move into Candidacy 2, which is the third year of formation. It's marked by being called and instituted as a reader or a lector. So the courses rightly include taking Pauline literature, the letters of St. Paul, homiletics. You begin to start learning how to craft a homily, how to proclaim effectively, how to do that in a very meaningful way that catches people, captures their heart, and sets them on fire to go and live the gospel. A daunting task and an important one, so we have a whole course dedicated just to that, which is only the springboard for future formation. Also take sacramental theology and church history. The conferences, again, looking to the next step, preparing to be an acolyte, that is one who serves at not just Mass, but at all the liturgies. So it's not just becoming an altar boy again, it's really gaining a deep appreciation and knowledge of the rituals of the church. We begin to shadow priests and other deacons as they minister these sacraments. And so we take a lot of time and great care in forming the men to ensure that they are as comfortable and as competent as possible in liturgies. So we learn the basic liturgical norms and practices of the church, and we also get to know the diocese, how we function here in Rockville Center. How does the bishop of this diocese meet the needs of the flock, and how do we fit into that? So we look at that in great detail. And finally, the fourth and final year is called Candidacy 3. It's marked by the institution as acolytes, that we are now serving at liturgies, and we take canon law, liturgical theology, Johannine literature, that is the Gospel of St. John, which is rather dense and absolutely stunning and beautiful, but requires really its own course, as well as his few smaller but beautiful epistles and the book of Revelation. And then we finally have the liturgical practices for deacons. So it's really very much a how-to for the diaconate. And so we have liturgical preparation, how to serve as a minister of baptisms and weddings and wakes and all the rest. And then, of course, ongoing homily development. So we have constant feedback as men are giving homilies throughout the day at morning prayer and evening prayer. The formation team and I will be giving critical feedback so you can improve your skill and become much more confident and competent as a homilist. We also have a newly introduced summer pastoral experience. This is something that we just started last year. We're basically off, as it were, from formal formation for about 3 months, June, July, and August. And there's so much to do in 4 short years. And it can seem like 4 years is a very long time, but trust me, it moves very, very fast, and there's a lot to do. And one of some of the feedback we were receiving is that men felt a little uncomfortable in different settings. They were kind of used to the parish, but they weren't perhaps as comfortable in other settings that more and more deacons are being called to, working in hospitals and hospice and prisons and other things. So what we decided to do was to use the summertime in a modest way. So let me first say, it's modest work in the summer. It's not nearly as much work as throughout the year for the academic courses and all those Saturdays. It's roughly, I'd say about 20 to 30 hours cumulatively, maybe a touch more, maybe a touch less, but somewhere in that range over the course of 3 months, where it will expose you to other ministries, other ways of using your gifts and your talents, and also what you're learning in the classroom and in conferences out there with people. And so, again, a wide variety of settings, be it hospitals and hospice, working in prisons, also in working on public speaking skills, helping to make a strong pitch for the Catholic Ministries Appeal, by which, by the way, the diaconate program is financed, and we'll get to that later on. And so we are the perfect poster boys, as it were, to go out and talk to parishioners about sharing their time, talent, and treasure for the good of the church. And so we work on that as well. And also, too, we're just simply shadowing priests and deacons in parishes, usually a different parish than our own, so we can see how other parishes operate and get a little more used to being a leader in a community as an ordained minister. So, what do I have to do? What do we have to do? A lot of people, bottom line for me, what do I have to do? Well, a number of things. For you men, it's attendance at all classes. All classes. And I've already alluded to, but let me be abundantly clear now. Our program is an all-day Saturday program. Every Saturday during the academic year. With the obvious exceptions like Columbus Day weekend, Thanksgiving weekend, etc. But it runs on the academic calendar. So from roughly the first Saturday after Labor Day through the first or second Saturday of May, every Saturday, it's just about half the year of the full calendar year, is spent here. And we'll talk about the daily schedule in a little bit, but it's all day Saturday. 7:45 to about 6 p.m. All day. So that seems like a lot, and it is, but realize that there are 13 sessions per semester, and there's a lot to do in those 13 sessions. Okay? You also have to make your individual and couple retreat. Okay, so again, ladies, guys, and the couples together. Those 3 afternoons of formation. Men have to complete all their academic work. Because if you're not completing academic work, even though the professor might give you an extension, if it's not completed, well, that means part of the academic piece has not been met. So we require that you complete your academic work on time. And you satisfactorily complete the summer pastoral assignment that's given to you by the formation team. You also meet with your spiritual director, men, monthly, and you meet with your formator twice a semester. We'll talk about that shortly. Wives are required to attend the annual retreat for all the wives, both of those who are candidates. We also invite the wives of men who are already ordained deacons. It's actually a beautiful weekend where a lot of ladies get together and friendships are made and great bonds are established there. So it's a very spiritually fruitful time as well. So those are some of the basic requirements for being in the program. A lot of people ask about the academic requirements. Well, first is, again, regardless of what your academic setting is prior, whether you have an undergraduate degree or not, because deacons are ordained to proclaim the Word of God and to be official teachers of the faith, they need to be well trained. So how does the church set that benchmark? Well, we do so by teaching at the graduate theological level. So again, whether or not you can get the MA in theology, that's the level we teach at, and that is the competency we look for. Because after all, it's an important work that we're about, and we have to, and I and the formation team, need to testify to the bishop that you are competent in explaining what the church teaches. So that's the level that we teach at. You have to maintain a C average, throughout the program. And if you are in the Master of Arts program under the auspices of St. Joseph's Seminary, because they're an academic institution, they want to keep their degree, worth something, and so they require a minimum of a B average if you're actually taking the courses for credit. So you can take the courses, again, you'll all be in the same class, and you'll be also with other people who are pursuing their degree. Some might be for credit, some might be technically auditing, but everyone is evaluated on that same basis. Is that clear? So the role of the formation faculty, my role is to oversee all the different facets of formations, all these 4 different dimensions, to see the nuts and bolts of the program, to get the speakers, to organize everything. And it's my job to ultimately give testimony to the bishop for your readiness to be advanced either into the program, admitted to the program, to make progress through it, and then eventually to be ordained. The formators are assigned to me by the bishop to assist me in that work. Right now we have 33 men in formation. It would be a daunting task for me to get to know 33 men very, very well, and their families, their wives, and to get to know them as well as I need to. So we have a team of 5 deacons, again you've seen them, that I assign to different men to kind of be a first stop, if you will, that first line of defense. So the formators offer encouragement and advice and counsel, but they are also evaluative. They are part of the team that evaluates, will challenge, will call to task at times the men in their charge. And so the guys often joke, they say, what do we do, what do we on the team do when they're in class? And I say, oh, it's simple, we get together and we talk about you. And we do, in large part, because we do spend time actively talking about the progress of the men in formation. And it's not just nitpicking. In fact, it usually hardly ever is. It's more about how is he progressing, how are things at home? How's his wife doing? How's he doing in class? Does he seem particularly stressed? Are things going well? If there are problems that arise, we address them. Okay? So the formators meet with their men regularly. And I've asked the team to meet with their men 3 times. I should say, 5 times formally. 2 times each semester, one-on-one. Formator and the man in formation. And then 1 time a year, usually in the early spring, there's an at-home visit. So the formator would go to you and be with you and your wives, and hopefully your family's there too, just to get to see you and know you and just, again, see you, I hate to put it this way, in your natural habitat. To see you in your comfort zone, because after all, you'll be coming here a lot. We want to see you in your home and get to know you and your family and the place you call home. So, again, 2 meetings per semester, so in the fall, 2 in the spring, and then 1 annual visit. And then there's an evaluation process, a formal evaluation process, which in part has a self-evaluation written by you. We take that, and your formator and I work on your formal evaluation, which you are given to read, and then that is submitted to the bishop. So it's rather transparent, but he will get an honest assessment of your progress in the program, and then at my recommendation, you either advance or not. Okay? So, again, what does a typical day look like here? Again, all day Saturdays, okay? We have morning prayer at 8 a.m. However, I open the office, or Carol, my assistant, we open the office usually around 6:30, 6:45, because men will start arriving then. Some of the early birds get here quite early. Also, too, we have bagels and coffee, which is nice. And so guys will sit around and catch up, maybe do some last-minute studying or this or that. But also, too, just enjoy each other's company. It's a great time of fraternity and camaraderie there before we get going on the day. And then by about 7:50 or so, men make their way into the main chapel, and we have morning prayer, which is in the Liturgy of the Hours, which is the prayer that deacons and priests and bishops and religious promise to pray each day. And so we form you in that, so that way you're comfortable and competent in doing that by the time you make that formal promise. And so we pray morning prayer together. And then we have class in the morning, so you'll take 1 of 2 classes for the morning session from about 8:30 to 11:45. There's certainly a break in there with the instructor. Then there's a break for lunch, and also a chance to get to the library, speak to your information advisor, speak to me, whatever it might be, stretch your legs, enjoy the building and the grounds, and just kind of get ready for the afternoon. There's a class from 1 to 4:15, again a different course, 2 courses a semester. And then at about 4:30, there is usually, though not always, a formation conference. So I'll set a schedule. So sometimes you'll go right into evening prayer at 4:30. Other times there'll be a conference first and then evening prayer. So I just encourage you to not look at that on the minimal side, but to look at it on the maximum side. So presume that there is a conference at 4:30 and then followed by evening prayer at 5:30. The long and short of it, about, at the latest, 7:45 a.m. to about 6 p.m. every Saturday, without exception. Sometimes it might be a touch longer if we have a particular celebration in the evening, like the institution of Raiders and Acolytes. We'll naturally have coffee and cake afterwards, so we want to have that time to celebrate together, so it might be a little closer to 7 by the time you get out of here. Okay? So that's our daily orarium here. Okay? So, who pays for all this? Okay? Well, the honest answer is you already are. In the sense that most of, the overwhelming majority of the budget for the academic formation is covered by diocesan subsidy, which comes from the Catholic Ministry's appeal. And so when you are contributing to that appeal, you are giving to the formation of priests and deacons, as well as feeding the hungry and taking care of the homeless and taking care of our hospitals and all those sorts of wonderful things that we're about. So you're already contributing, in a sense, towards this. So the diocese picks up the tab, as it were, in large part because of the generosity of her people. The parishes, your parishes that sponsor you, also take on some responsibility of the financial part of the program. And I'm still looking at that, and that's never a deal breaker. There are some parishes that can do that easily, other parishes where that might be tight. So I work with your pastors on that, so you don't have to worry too much about that. As far as what expenses do you incur, they're rather modest, but they do exist. So it would be the books for your classes, whatever books your instructors assign you. It also is your the incidentals, like the 4-volume Liturgy of the Hours, the 4-volume prayer books that we use. Purchasing those, it's a one-time purchase. Later on, there's purchasing an owl, that's a long white garment that a priest or deacon would wear, or an acolyte. So that would be purchased until the end of second year, third year rather. So there's that. Also to an annual, the men's retreat, the men contribute towards that. That costs usually about $200 a year. So the expense is rather minimal in comparison to the whole budget, but you are asked to contribute towards that. Now, let me be clear. If there's a financial issue, you just simply let me know. Whether it's, I'll speak to your pastors, but even personally, if there's an issue with purchasing books or this or that, I have resources, and there are some people who have told me that if there's a problem, rest assured there was no problem. So we'll work on that with you as well. But again, the overwhelming majority of the financial part is covered by the diocese. So, I have talked at you quite a bit, and I realize it's like taking a sip of water out of a fire hose. I've given you a lot of information to consider. And I don't know what you're thinking right now, and I'm not going to ask you to manifest that publicly, what you're thinking right now. But if you are starting to, or still thinking, maybe I should pursue this, or what do I do if I think I'm supposed to pursue this? Well, there are a number of steps that you can take to continue this discernment, okay? The first is you have with you right now a preliminary application. The first thing you do is take that, and take what I've shared with you, and prayerfully consider it. And I mean that. Take it to prayer. This is a vocation. So God wants to speak to our heart. Now, I know it would be really nice and easy and convenient if God spoke and said, be a deacon. That'd be nice, but I wouldn't hold your breath waiting for that. God often speaks to us in very subtle, quiet ways. Because if he said, be a deacon, that would probably scare the heck out of us, and we run the other direction. And so he speaks to us gently so we can listen. And he, as it were, converts our heart over time. So, prayerfully consider yourself, and then talk to and listen to those who love you the most. Your spouses, children, siblings, parents, close friends, colleagues, people whose opinions you value. Talk to them about it. See what their reactions are. Because sometimes we need to be validated a little bit by what others are saying. We might have an inkling or something, but what someone else says will resonate with us and either confirm or not what we're feeling. And so we should listen very carefully what the people that we love say to us. Also, too, for those who are married, think about how this will impact your marriage and your schedule and the kids and all of that. It's a lot. It's a lot of commitment. And sometimes people are under the illusion that, well, all right, it's going to be 4 tough years. We'll get through another day and it'll be much easier. I'm looking at my brother Deacons in the back right now, shaking their head laughing. That's not what happens. The formation program is meant to get you ready for diaconal service. The work is not removed, it's replaced. So instead of writing a paper on 3rd century Christology, you'll be writing a homily for that wedding on Saturday, or the homily on Sunday at Mass that you'll give 2 or 3 or 4 times. Instead of going to the hospital to, observe the chaplain in a pastoral setting, you'll actually be bringing communion to 2 or 3 or 5 or a dozen homebound and hospitalized people. We replace the work with ordination. We don't remove it. So it's a lifelong commitment that you and your wives and families have to prayerfully consider, will this work for us realistically? So, once you have those conversations, if you're still feeling the desire, fill out that preliminary application form, that 8.5 by 11 sheet that I have for you. You also want to get some passport photos, just simply because we like to keep everything organized, names and faces and all. So get some passport photos, both of you, men, and your wives. And gentlemen, when you take that picture, just a side note, it's important though, jacket and tie, nice big smile. Ladies, same thing, nice big smile, dress nicely. Because we use those pictures for a number of things, so we can keep names and faces together and organize, and they'll kind of track you through the years. So we want to make sure that they're nice the first time around. Attach one of each, one of you men, one of you ladies, attach it to the preliminary application and mail it right back to me. You'll want to speak to your pastor if you haven't already done so, but you'll want to speak to him even now after this presentation. Speak to him, share with him what you're thinking, what you've learned, what you're feeling, because at some point, if you do pursue the application, he'll need to write a letter of recommendation. In fact, I gave him a form to complete about you, so he gives some testimony about your readiness to enter into the formation program. So you'll want to talk to him about that. Take that preliminary application, okay, and mail it back to me as soon as you can, okay? And then you'll also hopefully call me to set up a time where I can speak with you and your wife, just the 3 of us, and get to know each other a little bit more, answer any questions you may have. And then also, too, I'll be honest with you, at the end of that conversation, or shortly thereafter, I'll let you know if you're able to pursue the application process. I try to keep it very transparent. I don't like surprises. And so if there's something that causes my attention to be caught, I'm going to tell you that right away. Because I don't want to string you along with false promises and then all of a sudden hit you with something. So I'll have an initial conversation. I'll let you know what I'm thinking. If there needs to be some more work done on something, I will let you know that. If not, we'll be able to proceed towards the application process. So, once you actually do that, then you can move into the actual application process, which is quite extensive. The first part of that is a written autobiography. It also includes a rather detailed questionnaire. There are references that we ask for, 3 in fact. One from someone who knows you personally, someone who knows you from your professional life, and someone who knows you from the parish, someone you've worked with on a committee or in a ministry. Again, not a pastor, not a deacon, but someone else, a lay person who's worked with you in a ministry, someone who's worked with you professionally, and someone who knows you personally, a neighbor or a friend, okay? There's also a formal application, name, address, phone number, all that sort of stuff, and biographical information, and some required documentation, including your baptismal certificate, that's an updated one, your marriage certificate if you are married, etc. So requiring a few documents. We ask you to take a physical, a medical approval, which is a rather simple form. It's nothing too in depth. It just simply is to ensure that you are physically up to fulfilling diaconal ministry, that you're in generally good health, and it's also a good idea to get an annual physical anyway. There's also a psychological exam, interview, and an analysis. Now, I just want to point out something here that's important, is that I have 2 psychologists that I work with. Both are excellent. I contract them to do your evaluation. So I pay for it, and that exam results belong to me. So you do not get copies of that. The psychologist will sit with you and explain what he or she has found and what they're going to say to me. I get that full report. I have access to it, as does the entire admission board. Okay? But you yourself will never be given a copy of it, nor can you ever request or obtain a copy of it. That's just an important thing to be mindful of. There are a number of interviews with members of the admission board. The admission board is made up of 4 priests, 4 pastors who are seasoned and have worked with deacons a long time, as well as 4 deacons and their wives. So men, you'll go and meet just you and the pastor at his residence, and then one of the deacons and his wife will come to your home and meet with both of you. And if the kids are home and that sort of thing, that's great too. And again, get to know you a little bit in your own setting and interview there as well. They take all that information. I take everything that the admission board interviews have given me, the psychologist, the references, all that sort of stuff. And then we sit in, the timeline goes like this. I hope to have interviews completed between November and mid-December. By Christmas, I like to know who's applying and have kind of my makeshift class there, have an idea of who's applying. And then I get the full applications out by late December, and then we're off to the races. I like to have the whole process wrapped up by about mid to late March. This year I can mark it by about Easter, okay? Then I take all that information, or maybe at the earliest first or second week of April. I take all that information, I have to disseminate it to the entire admission board. They have to read through the whole thing, through each file, and then we gather sometime in mid-May, end of May. We simply talk about you, deliberate. I take those recommendations of my own, I give them to Bishop Murphy, and then he gives final approval. And there are one of 3 ways in which the application can be rendered. Acceptance, very simple, begin the process of formation. Deferral, which means not yet, it's not a no, it's not yet. And if we do have a deferral, that means that I will sit with you and discuss with you why you defer, what steps you can take to firm up your application. And we do that for your own good, not just to spite you, but we don't want anyone who's entering the program who may not be quite ready yet. And the third option, of course, is a denial. And if there is a denial, I give you the opportunity to sit with me and I can discuss with you the reasons for that denial. Okay? News of your acceptance, deferral, or denial for the program will happen, usually I like it to be done, if everything goes right to plan, early June, if not mid to later June. But certainly sometime in June, you'll receive word. And I stay in communication with you throughout that process as well. Okay? Remember this, discernment and formation, by extension, is a two-way street. The fact that someone comes to the church and says, I think God's called me to be a deacon, we take that seriously. And throughout your period of discernment and formation, we'll continually ask you, how do you feel? And if you keep saying, yeah, I feel like God's called me to do this, good. But we as the church, in the person of the bishop and those who's appointed, myself and the formation team, we have the right and the obligation to ensure that that vocation is true, is valid. And so we're going to test and poke and prod and challenge a bit to ensure that this is really of God. And so discernment is a two-way street. You telling me, I feel God's called me to this, and if at some point you say, you know what, I don't think so, then we have the grace to say, you know what, I have to step aside from this now. It takes a great deal of courage and grace. And we too, on the formation side, have a very serious responsibility to constantly be praying for you all and evaluating you honestly and fairly for your good and the good of the church. Our people deserve the best. And we realize that we're all, every single one of us, yours truly, first and foremost, we're broken people. We're not perfect yet. But the people of God deserve the best. And so it's our job to ensure that you are as well formed as possible. And so that's why discernment is a two-way street. And we give you ample steps along the way to ensure that that conversation is happening and that the vocation you are feeling is valid and is the voice of God. So, at this time, I will entertain any questions that you have.